So my first speaker for this panel is Andy Flory. Andy Flory is Assistant Professor of Music at Carleton College in Northfield, Minnesota. He teaches courses in American music focusing on rock, rhythm and blues, and jazz. Andrew has written extensively about American R&B and is an expert on the music of Motown. His wonderful book, I Hear a Symphony, Listening to the Music of Motown, is now out from University of Michigan Press and working directly with Universal Records. He has also served as a consultant for several recent Motown reissues, including the recent 40th anniversary edition of Marvin Gaye's Trouble Man. And he is also a contributor to the History of Rock textbook, What's That Sound?, published by Norton. His talk is titled, The Artistry of Sometimes It Snows in April. Please welcome Andrew Flory.
Thank you very much. I'm not going to answer all those questions. I don't write much about Prince, so thanks for inviting me to the party. I'm a little nervous to talk about Prince in front of you all, but I'll do my best. It's been a very welcoming crew. I've been here all day, so I'm just going to get started. The angle of this panel is an investigation of Prince as artist. This is a topic with great range. It can mean different things to different people, and you'll hear a number of these perspectives in the comments that follow mine from these great people. For some, Prince's artistry is indelibly linked with things like fashion, dance, political views, navigating gender roles, and virtuosic musicianship. As a musicologist, I tend to think more about musical content, the songs he wrote, his manner of realizing those songs in live performance and in the studio, and the way he gained energy from an amazing cast of collaborators. I listen to and teach about music for a living, and most days I'm faced with a barrage of sounds from varying styles and time periods, but I still always find interesting things in Prince's music. Elements ranging from surface sounds to deep structural meaning and everything in between. I was reminded of this several days ago, during a massive mid-spring blizzard, when it seemed like the entire state of Minnesota was singing the refrain to Sometimes It Snows in April. Perhaps you too were thinking about this song last week, whether you were here for the storm or arranging travel plans to arrive for the conference. As I heard this song repeatedly last week, it made me think of a number of striking things related specifically to artistry. For one, it reveals Prince in a rare, sentimental, and vulnerable state, without the sex, dancing, religion, and other boundary-pushing elements that are so frequently at the center of his most popular work from the time. It's a song about death, and it is easy to hear it as a song about his own demise. This, of course, has not been lost on most Prince fans, since his actual passing, Sometimes It Snows, has been one of the most common songs used to remember him. There's been a rash of covers of this tune in the past several years, perhaps the most memorable being an extremely moving version performed by D'Angelo on The Tonight Show in the days following his death. I don't know if you saw that, but it was incredible, right? So let's talk about this music. Prince was an eccentric guy who cut across the grain in a number of ways. It's easy to see this in his use of fashion or in the manner in which he challenged notions of race and gender, but a song like Sometimes It Snows in April also helps us to hear his musical artistry. To be clear, I don't think any of these things acts independently from the other. In fact, it was the very notion of difference that Prince so carefully broadcast through visual and lyrical elements that created space for his musical artistry. His striking looks often accompanied striking sounds. With this in mind, I find at least three really arresting elements of artistry in Sometimes It Snows in April. Far from the sort of blatant virtuosity that provides his live guitar work, the studio expertise and one-man band approach of his first two records, or the intricate patchwork of live and overdub material that helped to create a record like Purple Rain, Prince's artistic work on this song lies mostly in the traditional realm of songwriting and vocal performance. Just taking a step back, it's important to realize that this track was a collaborative effort. It was performed and written by Prince, Wendy, and Lisa. We often lionize Prince for his ability to act as musical auteur, but the sort of collaboration documented in the well-known Parade version of Sometimes It Snows in April helps us to remember that Prince also fed off of the energy and creativity of a variety of A-list musicians for the majority of his career, several of which are sitting right in front of you. And as the last track on the final album credited to the Revolution, the timing of this recording occurred during a period when these particular musicians, Wendy and Lisa, had been working with Prince for several years and were relatively comfortable in his creative environment. So I'm going to just outline 3 things. We could do more, but I'm sure we could talk about this song forever. The first musical area of interest that warrants discussing, in my opinion, in Sometimes It Snows, is a loose collection of musical events that I think of as eccentric sounds. While the surface affect of the recording with its somber lyrics, mostly acoustic sounds and maudlin vibe, suggests a straightforward ballad, there are, upon closer listening, a number of really odd elements that increase my interest in the deeper atmosphere of this track. At the beginning of the recording, for example, after the entrance of a piano, a female vocal, and an acoustic guitar, another instrument enters that's not so easily identifiable, which sounds like it might be a guttural moaning, followed by what one of my students has so clearly described as something that sounds like a mouth trumpet. You know, when someone like plays trumpet by going like, right? That's kind of what it sounds like. Only seconds after Prince's unmistakable vocal enters, there's another eccentric sound that catches my ear, a rattling whose source is difficult to discern but impossible to ignore. Though many of us have probably listened to this song many times, we may not have noticed the rattling that occurs throughout the track. So let's listen to that. Let's just listen to the introduction to this track. I know that this is a super emotional track, so I'm actually going to just play some pieces for you so that we can maybe think about it a little differently than the totality of it all. And I want you to listen for these things. This weird instrument that comes in, and this sort of, some of the creaking sounds like it's coming from Wendy's guitar, but then there's other stuff that's happening that sounds like they're kind of shuffling around the studio, which I think is super interesting. You can hear some more creaking there at the end. It's really interesting, right? It really adds a sense of intimacy to the track, I think, that you might not even perceive. A second area of things that I'd like to consider falls under the category of variation. In this regard, we might hear a more traditional sense of songwriting and performance craft from this trio of musicians. The structure of Sometimes It Snows in April is fairly straightforward. There's a long introduction, which we just heard, followed by 2 verses, a chorus, 2 more verses, a chorus, and then a final verse and chorus with an extended tag at the end. Each of these sections, both the verses and the choruses, are squares 16 measures long, and each is comprised of 4 4-measure phrases. There aren't any time changes or anything, so the overall sense of phrasing is really predictable, which is great, because it allows us to clearly hear the work of Prince as vocal improviser. The first verse sets the stage. Most people probably know the melody of the song, repeating what is essentially the same melodic phrase 4 times for each of these 4-measure phrases. Do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do, right? The second verse begins in the same way, but in its third phrase, a distinct melodic variation occurs during a stunning moment when Prince's voice jumps up 2 octaves and then descends back into a higher version of that original melody, navigating between head and chest voice during a completely emotional lyric that exclaims, "I used to cry for Tracy because I want to see him again." So I'm going to play you the whole second verse so you can hear the first 2 phrases, which are this kind of the standard melody, and then he just does Prince, right, and does his thing, and it's like, and you've heard, by this point, you've heard that melody, that phrase 6 times, so when he launches into the 7th one and goes off, it's like, whoa, you know. There's another really effective moment of vocal variation later in the song, at the beginning of the 4th verse, when over the same verse progression, it's basically the same backing track, Prince moves to a more passionate middle register for the first 2 phrases, completely recasting the melody and phrase structure, while singing "He Used to Say So Strong," before simply laying out for an entire 4-measure phrase, which it's almost like, what's he doing, right? When's he going to come back in? And then returning back to the original melodic register for a final summative line. "No one could cry the way my Tracy cried." So here's the 4th verse. All right, I want to talk about one more thing in this song, an element that's perhaps the most artistic endeavor of the entire composition. I call it simply the chord. It's a moment in the chorus which seems to come from nowhere, making any trained musician sit up in their seat to wonder what will happen next. Like the verses, the chorus sections comprise 4 square phrases. The first 2 move, where am I? In a predictably manner. Both start on an A chord, and the second makes a sneaky move to an F sharp major chord. It's the 3rd phrase that goes haywire. Starting on an A and moving up chromatically through A sharp to B in an extremely dissonant fashion, with a crunchy harmony vocal supporting it. This highly unorthodox move is jarring, to say the least. I wouldn't say it's indebted to rock harmony or even jazz, but rather an idiosyncratic sense of freedom with music that mirrors Prince's artistic spirit. I find it completely fitting and almost expected that in an otherwise sappy and serious Prince tune, there would be at least one complete curveball, an announcement that we should never know what to expect from an artist of his stature. So here's the chorus, and listen in that 3rd phrase for the if you never really thought about it, listen for the crazy chord. Sorry. Let us not forget that past all his visual and performing genius, Prince was first and foremost a musician who wrote great songs, made fantastic records, and infused his innovative spirit into a wide variety of musical activities. This is how we know him and love him best, as a fearless musical artist who had the ability to make the most dissonant and complex ideas palatable to millions of listeners. I think it is safe to say that this indeed qualifies as artistry. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. That was great.